This story happened to me about a year or two ago when I was visiting the home of a friend with benefits. Let's call my friend Tom. Tom and I had been seeing each other casually at that point for about a year and a half. I was in my mid-20s, and he was in his early 40s. I guess you could call our relationship beneficial because he enjoyed my company and in return, he helped me with some monthly expenses. Tom had always expressed his love for me, but I just didn't feel the same way. To be honest, if he wasn't helping me financially, I don't think I would date him at all. At the time of this story, Tom and I lived several hours away from each other by car and just under 2 hours by plane. Tom would occasionally fly to visit me for a long weekend. This time, I would be visiting his home for the very first time. When I arrived in Tom's city, it was daytime on a Friday. Tom had taken the afternoon off from work to show me around. We went out for lunch and shopped for a bit before we went back to his place. We pulled up to his home, which I must say, was beyond beautiful. Right away, I could see myself living there. I grew up in a very modest home, and I was living at that time in a tiny one-bedroom apartment. The home had been given to Tom by his parents as a graduation gift for him completing law school 10 years earlier. When I graduated from college, all I got was a pat on the back. When I walked into the home, I felt intimidated by its size and furnishings, but of course I did my best to hide my insecurity. Tom gave me a tour of the beautiful 5-bedroom, 5.5-bathroom home. He showed me to the master bedroom, which is the room he slept in, and of course I would be joining him there that evening. After touring his home, we went out for dinner, drinks, and a walk downtown. We were back at his place and ready for bed by 1 the next morning. During my sleep that night, I felt my hair being pulled and like I was being held down. I tried to move, but I couldn't move or anything. I feel paralyzed. I don't remember exactly how I acted, but Tom told me that I was tossing and turning and mumbling odd things. I remember being held down by a woman with light-colored hair and freckles resembling like Tom. When he managed to wake me up, I told him what I had encountered, and he assured me that no one was in the room with us and that we were alone. I could barely sleep that night. I just ended up watching videos on my phone while Tom slept like a baby. The next morning, which was Saturday, we had breakfast together at Tom's place. After breakfast, he received a disturbing phone call. One of his relatives had been arrested and he had to go to the local jail. He apologized that he had to leave but said he would be back in a few hours and left his credit card so I could go shopping. After he left, I walked to the master bathroom to take a shower. While I was in the shower, I heard a lot of moving around in the bedroom. I turned off the water so I could get a better listen to what was happening. "Tom, is that you?" I asked. No one answered and I went back to my shower. When I turned the water on again, the sound started again. Then I heard things being thrown around the room. I looked over at the vanity and all of Tom's personal care items started flying off and onto the floor. There was no one in the bathroom with me. The stuff was just falling on their own. I got out of the shower quickly and looked in the bedroom, and what I saw next really scared me. I saw the pictures on the bedroom wall had fallen onto the ground and broken. At first, I thought someone had broken into the house, but then I noticed that nothing had been rummaged through. I thought maybe the pictures weren't secured on the wall. I picked up the pictures and placed them on the bed and returned to the bathroom to blow dry my hair. The mirror was still foggy from my shower. I wiped the mirror with my hand, and what I saw next really sent shock through my entire body. In the mirror, standing behind me was the same angry woman from my dream the night before. When I turned around, she wasn't there. I looked in the mirror once more and she was gone. I quickly got dressed and ran down the street to a nearby park where I called a ride. My ride took me to a nearby coffee shop where I waited for Tom to pick me up about an hour later. I was far too startled to go shopping or sightseeing. When Tom came to pick me up, I told what had happened to me when I was at his place earlier. I could tell that he didn't believe me, and I wanted to forget about my experience. We never spoke about it again that day, and we enjoyed the rest of our day together. The next day, Tom was telling me about his family, including his mom, who had passed away right before he met me. He was showing me photos of everyone. He showed me a photo of a woman who looked exactly like the one I saw in my dream and in the bathroom mirror. I couldn't believe it. The creepy ghost was his mother. I told him that I thought I had an encounter with his mother's ghost. He chuckled and said, "Well, my mom was always jealous of every woman I brought around." After that day, I never visited Tom in his home again, and eventually we drifted apart. Thank you for listening to my story. Stay spooked.
When I was about 12 years old, my parents decided to send me away to summer camp for 2 weeks somewhere in rural Kansas. At the time we were living in Missouri, but my parents both grew up in Kansas, and we still had family there, including my favorite cousin who was about my age. This was my first time going to any summer camp, and I was excited because my cousin would be there, and as an only child, I cherished any time spent with my cousin, who we will call Jenny. The camp was on a large property, about 30 acres of land out in the middle of nowhere. There were children of all age groups attending this camp, and my cousin and I were in the same cabin with the 12, 13, and 14-year-old kids. The girls and boys had separate bedrooms and bathrooms, but we would interact during activities and meals. The first day we arrived, we met a boy who was 14, let's call him Kyle. Kyle was tall with dark features. His style was very gothic. He was a bit of a bully and tended to pick on the younger kids, especially the girls. He had been attending this camp since he was 6. South AG was well known to the chaperones, but not in the same way we knew him. The adults thought he was kind and helpful, but didn't seem to be acquainted with his other side. Every day Kyle would sit down to eat lunch with us and would offer to tell us ghost stories, but we told him no the first few times, until about the third day we agreed. Kyle began to tell us that the land the camp was built on was once a Native American cemetery, and the property was haunted. My cousin and I both looked at each other and laughed in disbelief. "Yeah, right, there's no way." I told him, "You'll see, you girls better sleep with one eye open," he told us. "If this place is so haunted, how come you continue to come back every year?" He assured us that the ghosts were friendly to him and they didn't bother him at all. We continued laughing at him, and the more we laughed, the more he assured us that the place was haunted. The ghosts who haunt this place make it their goal to reveal themselves to those who don't believe in their existence, he told us. That very night, when Jenny and I went to our room, we told some of the other girls what Kyle had told us, and they also laughed. After a few minutes of chatting, we all fell asleep. It was about 3 a.m. when I felt someone in the bed next to me. I opened my eyes and saw no one, so I rolled over and went back to sleep. When moments later I felt something pulling on my feet, I jumped up there. Standing in front of me was a little girl with a white dress on. She looked very angry. "What are you doing here? Are you lost?" I asked her, assuming she was one of the younger kids from the other cabin. She didn't respond, and I stood up and reached out to take her hand to walk her to one of the rooms where the adults slept, but as I stood up, she disappeared. That's when a few of the other girls, including Jenny, woke up and began asking me who I was talking to. I told them, "The little girl who was just here, I think she was lost, but she just disappeared." Everyone was confused and didn't know which little girl I was talking about. The next day, while we were getting dressed, Jenny asked me, "What was that about last night? Are you okay?" I assured her I was fine and changed the subject. Later, that day during lunch, while Jenny was grabbing her lunch from the buffet line, I sat down next to Kyle and said, "Hey, the ghosts who roam this place, can you describe them to me?" He said, "Why do you ask?" I told him I was just curious, but he didn't believe me. "You saw one, didn't you?" I told him I didn't think so. Then that's when he said, "It's usually a little girl. Her name is Maddie, and she wears a white dress. Sometimes she's alone, and sometimes she's with her parents." I couldn't believe it. The little girl he described was the same girl I saw the night before. Soon Jenny sat down, and the topic changed. That night I went to bed, and I must admit, it was difficult for me to fall asleep, but when I finally did, I felt the same thing the night before. Someone was in the bed with me, and when I put my hand out to touch them, there was no one. I was afraid to open my eyes because I didn't want to see the little girl again. I opened my eyes slowly, and there it was, a family, the little girl and her parents. I let out a gut-hurling scream so loud it woke everyone in the cabin. All the girls woke up, and the adults came rushing in and turning the lights on. They asked me what was wrong, but each time I opened my mouth to speak, I couldn't. I felt a hand over my mouth, and I felt paralyzed. Stuck to the chair I was sitting in while everyone questioned me about what was wrong. I looked through the window beyond everyone, and what I saw next was even scarier than anything I had ever seen. I saw the little girl hanging from a tree outside while her family cried. I couldn't believe I was watching the demise of the little girl I had been seeing. I just stared out the window as the tears rolled down my cheeks. "What's out there?" one of the chaperones asked before turning around to look through the same window. I could tell by the look on her face, she didn't see the same thing I was seeing. "What is it?" "There's nothing out there," she said when she turned back around. At this point, everyone was looking through the window with confusion. There was an analog clock on the wall. I looked at it, and the time read 3:15 a.m. Later on that day, the camp director called my parents to let them know what had happened. I spoke to my mom, and she asked me if I was okay and whether I wanted to leave camp. I told her no, even though I wanted to, because I knew if I left, Jenny would likely have to leave also, and I didn't want to ruin her summer by us having to leave camp after only being there for about a week. We had made it halfway through, and I didn't want to quit. Besides, everyone who completes camp would get a gold medal, and I wanted to earn my gold medal. As I hung up the phone with my mom, I looked out the open door of the chaperone office, and there stood Kyle with a smirk on his face. He was standing around, and I could tell he was waiting for me to leave the office. After the phone call with my mom, I walked out of the office. Kyle and I were face to face when he said, "Wow, you actually have the guts to stay, huh? Most people don't last a day after they meet Maddie," he said while laughing. "Wait until you see what else awaits you." I was so scared even I couldn't believe I was staying another week. I was soon beginning to regret my decision to stay after hearing Kyle promise that the worst is yet to come. After lunch that day, there was an activity planned where we had to hunt for clues that lead to a key that would unlock a prize. The activity took us on a hunt to find clues in pairs, and as luck would have it, I was paired with Kyle. "The universe hates me," I said after I saw that I had pulled his name out of the hat. "Hello, partner," he said with a grin on his face. We started our hunt, and we found a few clues very quickly, which put us in the lead among the 6 groups. "Watch out! Maddie is behind you!" Kyle yelled, spooking the crap out of me. I screamed loudly, and one group that was nearby looked at us in confusion as Kyle laughed. "That's not funny," I told him. He continued laughing hysterically, and then he said, "Hey, I think the next clue is in that shed over there, but I have to run back to the cabin to use the bathroom." The cabin was at least a 5-minute walk away from where we were on the property, and 3 minutes if you ran. "Oh, please hurry," I told him. I wondered why he couldn't just use the bathroom outdoors, but I wasn't about to ask him. "I'll run. Don't worry though, we're leading," he assured me. "Just go in the shed and look around for the next clue. Here you go," he told me while handing me a flashlight. I took the flashlight and looked around, realizing I was all alone as Kyle ran back to the cabin. I opened the rusty door as it creaked. I turned the flashlight on and looked around for the next clue, but as I stumbled in the crowded shed, I couldn't find anything. That's when the batteries in my flashlight died, making the shed pitch black. Almost immediately, I felt a tap on my shoulder, and I turned around quickly, throwing my hands up. I couldn't believe what I was seeing. It was the same people I saw the night before, but just the man and woman. I was face to face with them. "Hi, sweetie," the woman said. "We want you to come with us." I turned to run towards the door of the shed, and in front of the door stood the little girl, trapping me inside. I was screaming for help, but no one was coming, and after a few screams, the little girl covered my mouth with her hand. "Now turn around," the man said. I started crying, and I turned around, and there I was, watching the demise of the man and woman. The woman and the man were both holding muskets, and before they put the barrels in their mouths, they said in unison, "We will never be the same without our Maddie. We want to be with her." There, I watched their demise, and after it was all over, the little girl disappeared immediately, allowing me to run from the shed. Once out of the shed, I began throwing up and crying hysterically. As I raised my head, I saw Kyle standing in front of me laughing. I looked around, and there was no one else there but the two of us. I ran away from the shed, and the further away I ran, the closer I was to one of the adults, a tall woman with red hair and freckles. When I finally got up to her, she said very angrily, "Why are you guys over by that shed? The shed isn't even on the map. Let's go, young lady. You guys are in last place now," she said as she waved her hand at Kyle in the distance, calling for him to follow us. As we caught up with the other teams, the winning team was celebrating, and everyone else looked at us with confusion on their faces yet again. "Have you been throwing up?" the camp nurse asked. "I'm fine. I would like to call my mom, please." She walked me to the office, and together we called my mom. Once I heard my mom's voice, I broke down into tears and told her I wanted to come home. She didn't ask me any questions. She just said she would send someone to pick me up, since she was all the way in Missouri, about a 4-hour drive away. A few hours later, Jenny's parents came to pick us up. The whole ride back to her house, I kept apologizing, and everyone assured me it was okay. "You had a really tough time, huh? I know it was your first time at camp and the first time away from your mom and dad for so long," my aunt said, while my uncle just looked up in the rearview mirror and winked. Jenny held my hand the entire ride back to her house, which was about an hour and a half. Once we arrived at her house, my parents were there to greet us, and I just ran into my mom's arms and cried. When we returned to Missouri, my parents just assumed the same thing my aunt did, that I was homesick. I never spoke about camp with anyone, and I tried to forget the entire experience. Once, when I was a teenager, my mom and dad told the story of a little girl who met her demise on the property of the camp. She said the parents of the little girl were so distraught that they took their own lives. After I heard my parents tell the story, I knew that my experience at camp wasn't just my imagination. I did tell my parents that there was a bully at camp named Kyle who told me the story. When I told them his last name, they said they also knew Kyle's family and said they were a strange family with a little boy who was fascinated with the occult. I am now an adult with children of my own, and each year my mom suggests that I send them to camp. You never know, maybe they'll like it. You can't deprive them of their own experiences, she always says. I usually tune her out and hope that my children never ask to go to camp, and especially not the camp I went to.
When I was about 12 years old, my parents decided to send me away to summer camp for 2 weeks. somewhere in rural Kansas. About that time we were living in Missouri, but my parents both grew up in Kansas. We still had family there, including my favorite cousin who was about my age. This was my first time going to any summer camp. I was excited because my cousin would be there. As an only child, I cherished any time spent with my cousin, who we will call Jenny. The camp was on a large property, about 30 acres of land out in the middle of nowhere. There were children of all age groups attending this camp. My cousin and I were in the same cabin with the 12, 13, and 14-year-old kids. The girls and boys had separate bedrooms and bathrooms, but we would interact during activities and meals. The first day we arrived, we met a boy who was 14, let's call him Kyle. Kyle was tall with dark features. His style was very gothic. He was a bit of a bully and tended to pick on the younger kids, especially the girls. He had been attending this camp since he was 6. He was well known to the chaperones, but not in the same way we knew him. The adults thought he was kind and helpful, but didn't seem to be acquainted with his other side. Every day Kyle would sit down to eat lunch with us, and would offer to tell us ghost stories. We told him no, the first few times, until about the 3rd day we agreed. Kyle began to tell us that the land the camp was built on was once a Native American cemetery and the property was haunted. My cousin and I both looked at each other and laughed in disbelief. Yeah, right, there's no way. I told him. You'll see, you girls better sleep with one eye open, he told us. If this place is so haunted, how come you continue to come back every year? He assured us that the ghosts were friendly to him, and they didn't bother him at all. We continued laughing at him. The more we laughed, the more he assured us that the place was haunted. The ghosts who haunt this place make it their goal to reveal themselves to those who don't believe in their existence, he told us. That very night, when Jenny and I went to our room, we told some of the other girls what Kyle had told us, and they also laughed. After a few minutes of chatting, we all fell asleep. It was about 3 a.m. when I felt someone in the bed next to me. I opened my eyes and saw no one, so I rolled over and went back to sleep. Moments later, I felt something pulling on my feet. I jumped up there. Standing in front of me was a little girl with a white dress on. She looked very angry. "What are you doing here? Are you lost?" I asked her, assuming she was one of the younger kids from the other cabin. She didn't respond. I stood up and reached out to take her hand to walk her to one of the rooms where the adults slept, but as I stood up, she disappeared. That's when a few of the other girls, including Jenny, woke and began asking me who I was talking to. I told them, the little girl who was just here. I think she was lost, but she just disappeared. Everyone was confused and didn't know which little girl I was talking about. The next day, while we were getting dressed, Jenny asked me, "What was that about last night? Are you okay?" I assured her I was fine and changed the subject. Later, that day during lunch, I sat down next to Kyle and said, "Hey, the ghosts who roam this place, can you describe them to me?" He said, "Why do you ask?" I told him I was just curious, but he didn't believe me. "You saw one, didn't you?" I told him I didn't think so. That's when he said, "It's usually a little girl. Her name is Maddie. She wears a white dress. Sometimes she's alone and sometimes she's with her parents." I couldn't believe it. The little girl he described was the same girl I saw the night before. Soon Jenny sat down, and the topic changed. That night I went to bed, and I must admit, it was difficult for me to fall asleep. When I finally did, I felt the same thing the night before. Someone was in the bed with me, and when I put my hand out to touch them, there was no one. I was afraid to open my eyes because I didn't want to see the little girl again. I opened my eyes slowly, and there it was, a family. The little girl and her parents. I let out a gut-hurling scream so loud it woke everyone in the cabin. All the girls woke up and the adults came rushing in and turning the lights on. They asked me what was wrong, but each time I opened my mouth to speak, I couldn't. I felt a hand over my mouth. I felt paralyzed. Stuck to the chair I was sitting in while everyone questioned me about what was wrong. I looked through the window beyond everyone, and what I saw next was even scarier than anything I had ever seen. I saw the little girl hanging from a tree outside while her family cried. I couldn't believe I was watching the demise of the little girl I had been seeing. I just stared out the window as the tears rolled down my cheeks. "What's out there?" one of the chaperones asked before turning around to look through the same window. I could tell by the look on her face. She didn't see the same thing I was seeing. "What is it?" "There's nothing out there." At this point, everyone was looking through the window with confusion. There was an analog clock on the wall. I looked at it and the time read 3:15 a.m. Later on that day, the camp director called my parents to let them know what had happened. I spoke to my mom, and she asked me if I was okay, whether I wanted to leave camp. I told her no, even though I wanted to, because I knew if I left, Jenny would likely have to leave also, and I didn't want to ruin her summer by us having to leave camp after only being there for about a week. We had made it halfway through, and I didn't want to quit. Besides, everyone who completes camp would get a gold medal, and I wanted to earn my gold medal. As I hung up the phone with my mom, I looked out the open door of the chaperone office, and there stood Kyle with a smirk on his face. He was standing around, and I could tell he was waiting for me to leave. After the phone call with my mom, I walked out of the office. Kyle and I were face to face when he said, "Wow, you actually have the guts to stay, huh? Most people don't last a day after they meet Maddie," he said while laughing. "Wait until you see what else awaits you." I was so scared even I couldn't believe I was staying another week. I was soon beginning to regret my decision to stay after hearing Kyle promise that the worst is yet to come. After lunch that day, there was an activity planned where we had to hunt for clues that lead to a key that would unlock a prize. The activity took us on a hunt to find clues in pairs, and as luck would have it, I was paired with Kyle. "The universe hates me," I said after I saw that I had pulled his name out of the hat. "Hello, partner," he said with a grin on his face. We started our hunt, and we found a few clues very quickly, which put us in the lead among the 6 groups. "Watch out, Maddie is behind you," Kyle yelled, spooking the crap out of me. I screamed loudly, and one group that was nearby looked at us in confusion as Kyle laughed. "That's not funny," I told him. He continued laughing hysterically, and then he said, "Hey, I think the next clue is in that shed over there, but I have to run back to the cabin to use the bathroom." The cabin was at least a 5-minute walk away from where we were on the property. "Oh, please hurry," I told him. I wondered why he couldn't just use the bathroom outdoors, but I wasn't about to ask him. "I'll run, don't worry though, we're leading," he assured me. "Just go in the shed and look around for the next clue. Here you go," he told me while handing me a flashlight. I took the flashlight and looked around, realizing I was all alone as Kyle ran back to the cabin. I opened the rusty door as it creaked. I turned the flashlight on and looked around for the next clue, but as I stumbled in the crowded shed, I couldn't find anything. That's when the batteries in my flashlight died, making the shed pitch black. Almost immediately, I felt a tap on my shoulder, and I turned around quickly, throwing my hands up. I couldn't believe what I was seeing. It was the same people I saw the night before, but just the man and woman. I was face to face with them. "Hi, sweetie," the woman said. "We want you to come with us." I turned to run towards the door of the shed, and in front of the door stood the little girl, trapping me inside. I was screaming for help, but no one was coming, and after a few screams, the little girl covered my mouth with her hand. "Now turn around," the man said. I started crying. I turned around, and there I was, watching the demise of the man and woman. The woman and the man were both holding muskets, and before they put the barrels in their mouths, they said in unison, "We will never be the same without our Maddie. We want to be with her." There, I watched their demise, and after it was all over, the little girl disappeared immediately, allowing me to run from the shed. Once out of the shed, I began throwing up and crying hysterically. As I raised my head, I saw Kyle standing in front of me laughing. I looked around, and there was no one else there but the two of us. I ran away from the shed. The further away I ran, the closer I was to one of the adults, a tall woman with red hair and freckles. When I finally got up to her, she said very angrily, "Why are you guys over by that shed? The shed isn't even on the map. Let's go, young lady, you guys are in last place now," as she waved her hand at Kyle in the distance, calling for him to follow us. As we caught up with the other teams, the winning team was celebrating, and everyone else looked at us with confusion on their faces yet again. "Have you been throwing up?" the camp nurse asked. "I'm fine. I would like to call my mom, please." She walked me to the office, and together we called my mom. Once I heard my mom's voice, I broke down into tears and told her I wanted to come home. She didn't ask me any questions, she just said she would send someone to pick me up since she was all the way in Missouri, about 4 hours away. A few hours later, Jenny's parents came to pick us up. The whole ride back to her house, I kept apologizing, and everyone assured me it was okay. "You had a really tough time, huh? I know it was your first time at camp and the first time away from your mom and dad for so long." My uncle just looked up in the rearview mirror and winked. Jenny held my hand the entire ride back to her house, which was about an hour and a half. Once we arrived at her house, my parents were there to greet us, and I just ran into my mom's arms and cried. When we returned to Missouri, my parents just assumed the same thing my aunt did, that I was homesick. I never spoke about camp with anyone, and I tried to forget the entire experience. Once, when I was a teenager, my mom and dad told the story of a little girl who met her demise on the property of the camp. She said the parents of the little girl were so distraught that they took their own lives. After I heard my parents tell the story, I knew that my experience at camp was just my imagination. I did tell my parents that there was a bully at camp named Kyle who told me the story. When I told them his last name, they said they also knew Kyle's family and said they were a strange family with a little boy who was fascinated with the occult. I am now an adult with children of my own, and each year my mom suggests that I send them to camp. "You never know, maybe they'll like it. You can't deprive them of their own experiences," she always says. I usually tune her out and hope that my children never ask to go to camp. Especially not the camp I went to.
About 3.5 years ago, my best friend Gina and I decided to take a road trip across the country. It was something we had talked about doing for years and finally decided that it was the right time to put our plan in motion. It was January of 2020, right before the start of the global pandemic that sent the world into a frenzy. The morning that we left for the trip, we loaded up my Jeep with all our personal belongings and a cooler. We thought we had everything we needed, until my dad, who helped us load everything into the SUV, suggested that we take a map with us. He said we should have it just in case anything happened. We laughed at him, and I said, "Dad, it's 2020. Nobody uses these things anymore. We have GPS on our phones, and we will be fine." My dad was in the military, and he was also a very traditional man who believed that two women shouldn't be on a cross-country road trip alone. He was paranoid about the dangers of the world and wanted to make sure we were safe. We accepted the map and the utility knife, which he had placed in the glove compartment. We bid my parents goodbye and waved at everyone as we drove away. We were excited. For us, the trip represented our entrance into adulthood. The engine hummed as the open road stretched before us. Gina and I had been cruising along for a few days now, exploring new places and enjoying our freedom. The sun painted the sky with shades of orange and pink, casting a warm glow on everything it touched. The wind rustled through the open windows, and our favorite songs played in the background. Between songs, we shared stories from our childhood which were mostly funny memories that kept us laughing for hours. But then, just as we were in the middle of nowhere, the GPS on my phone lost its signal. I began to panic as I tapped the screen repeatedly, trying to refresh the map. It was no use. We were officially in uncharted territory. Gina tried to find a signal on her phone so we could use her GPS, but we had no luck with her phone either. Unlike me, she remained calm though. She was always the brave and adventurous one. Very little could scare Gina. She turned to me with a mischievous grin and said, "Well, looks like we're going old school, Marie." I frowned, as a sense of unease creeped over me. Suddenly, my father's voice echoed in my head. When he suggested we take the map with us, we had laughed and called him old-fashioned. As the miles rolled on, Gina reached into the glove compartment and pulled out the map my father had conveniently placed there. "Let's give this a shot, Marie." I found a safe spot to pull over, and we spread the map out on the hood of the car. I stared at it, feeling utterly clueless. Gina grinned, leaning over to examine the map with me. "Okay, so, this is a map." I couldn't help but roll my eyes. "Yeah, Gina, I know it's a map, but I have no idea how to read it." She laughed. "No worries, I got this. See these squiggly lines? Those are roads. And those little triangles? They're towns. All we gotta do is figure out where we are and where we wanna go." I looked at the map skeptically. "Alright, but how do we know which way is north?" Gina pointed at the map's legend. "Right here, it says north is up. So, we just need to orient the map that way." We both leaned over the map, trying to determine our location. It wasn't as easy as it looked, and we had a spirited debate about which direction we were facing. Finally, we reached a consensus and decided on our approximate location and the direction we wanted to go. Gina traced a route with her finger, and we marveled at how much we had come to rely on modern technology. "Ready to give it a shot?" Gina asked, folding up the map and tucking it away. I nodded. My anxiety eased a bit as we got back on the road. "Let's do it." The shortcut we had found on the map seemed like a brilliant idea at the time. It promised to shave off a significant chunk of our travel time, and we were eager to reach our next destination. As we followed the winding roads, the scenery changed dramatically. We left the well-maintained highways behind and found ourselves on a narrow, pothole-ridden road that seemed to lead deeper into the wilderness. The sun was down by this time and darkness had settled in, but our headlights illuminated the way ahead. There were so many twists and turns on this unfamiliar route. Gina glanced at the map and then back at the road. According to this, we should be on the right track. But the road grew narrower, and the forest around us grew denser. The GPS on my phone still had no service, and I couldn't shake the feeling of isolation. Suddenly, the road ended abruptly. We were faced with a barricade of fallen trees, blocking our path completely. Gina slammed on the brakes, and the car skidded to a stop. We sat in stunned silence for a moment, our hearts pounding in our chests. "What now?" I asked. Gina didn't answer immediately. Finally, she spoke, and I could tell she was filled with uncertainty. "I think we need to turn around and find another way." I nodded, and we slowly began to maneuver the car in reverse. The headlights lit up the trees the way ahead. I noticed a small house in the distance beyond the trees, and I couldn't help but feel like we were being watched. Just as we were about to turn around, we heard a loud bang that echoed through the night. It was unlike anything I had ever heard before, a sound that creeped us the heck out. It sounded like gunfire, and it didn't take long before we confirmed that it was. We heard 2 more bangs accompanied by sparks each time. Gina and I locked eyes. That was the first time she looked scared. She had a look of terror on her face. Without a word, she slammed the car into reverse and floored the gas pedal, heading back the way we had come. But the mount car got stuck in what felt like mud. I yelled for Gina to keep going, but nothing she did would release our tires from whatever had held our car in place. We both got out to check out the tires, and we realized that we weren't stuck in mud. We were caught in what appeared to be a trap. Gina reached for the knife that my dad had put in the glove compartment, and we tried to cut the very thick cable that strapped the tires down. The cable was too thick, and the knife did very little to help. We checked out phones for reception because we knew we would need help getting out of the mess we were in. We had no cell service, and we were screwed. In the distance, we could see 2 figures approaching us. The men looked scruffy and were covered in camouflage gear. They both carried shotguns, and we could tell they were ready to fire at us again. Gina yelled out, "Please don't shoot." Neither of the men spoke a word, but they kept walking towards us. When they approached us, it was obvious that they were father and son because one looked significantly older than the other, but they both looked alike. The father spoke. He said, "You girls lost or something?" I stayed quiet and Gina spoke. "Yes, sir, we are stuck here." "You girls are on private property, you know that?" he said. Gina explained to him that we had made a mistake and taken the wrong route, but we would be on our way as soon as we were able to get our vehicle out of the trap. The father gestured for the son to give him a hand as they dug my car out of the trap. It took about 20 minutes before our tires were released from the trap and we were on our way. Before we left, the older man asked us where we were heading and gave us directions to get back on the highway. The road seemed to stretch on forever, and we drove in silence, both of us lost in our thoughts. It was only when we finally reached the main highway again that we dared to speak. He had lectured us about how we needed to be careful. He said that usually when people stepped on his property, he didn't ask any questions, he simply shot them down like a deer. My heart skipped a beat when he said that, and I said a prayer in my head. I prayed for our safety. We continued our journey in silence, the man's directions now our trusted guide as we stuck to the main roads. The shortcut had nearly cost us our lives, and it was a lesson we would never forget. When we were finally back on the highway, a sense of relief washed over us. We continued our journey and arrived at our final destination with memory of our wrong turn pierced in our minds. The trip back home was long but went off without a hitch. When we returned home, I told my parents what had happened, and of course they were happy we made it out safely. It would be a while before my dad ever trusted me to take another road trip again. I remember that hot, sticky day in Puerto Rico as vividly as if it had happened yesterday. My father and I had traveled there to visit relatives and immerse ourselves in the vibrant culture of the island. Little did we know, that day would take an unexpected and terrifying turn. My father was a very curious man who had a knack for getting us lost in unfamiliar places. So, when he suggested we go for a ride around the city to explore its hidden corners, I hesitated for a moment but eventually agreed. It was a chance to bond and make some memories, or so I thought. We set out in our rental car down on the bustling streets of San Juan. The city was a whirlwind of colors, sounds, and flavors, and I couldn't help but be captivated by it all. As we navigated the streets, my father's sense of direction seemed to waver. The GPS we had borrowed from our relatives was doing its best, but the unfamiliar roads and a language barrier made it challenging to find our way. We made a wrong turn somewhere in the maze of narrow streets, and before we knew it, we were in an area that felt different. The vibrant colors of the buildings gave way to crumbling facades, and the lively chatter of tourists faded into the distant hum of life in the barrios. I couldn't help but feel a sense of unease as we ventured deeper into this unfamiliar territory. My father, ever the optimist, brushed off my concerns and assured me that we would find our way back to the safety of our family's house. That's when it happened. Two cars, sleek and menacing, pulled up behind us. Their engines were growling like hungry beasts. The driver of the car directly behind us flashed his headlights aggressively. My heart pounded in my chest as I turned to my father, who was gripping the steering wheel with white knuckles. "Dad, what's going on?" My father glanced in the rearview mirror and swallowed hard. "I'm not sure, son. But I think we might be in trouble." I watched in horror as the two cars continued to tail us closely. It was clear that something was wrong, and fear began to set in. Just when we thought things couldn't get any worse, a man on a motorcycle rode up alongside us. My heart sank as I caught sight of the man. His face was covered by a dark helmet, and a gun gripped tightly in his hand. With an angry gesture, he motioned for us to pull over to the side of the road. The adrenaline surged through my veins as my father obediently steered our car to the curb. As the dust settled, the man on the motorcycle dismounted and approached our vehicle. I could see the gun in his hand, and my throat tightened with fear. The stranger, his voice was low but commanding, demanded to know why we were in the neighborhood and who we were looking for. My father explained that we had taken a wrong turn and were simply trying to find our way back to our family's house. The man, who identified himself as Carlos, scrutinized us carefully. He was surrounded by an air of danger and authority, and I could tell that he was not to be messed with. After a tense exchange, Carlos ordered my father and me to step out of our car. My heart raced as we complied, our hands raised as we surrendered. We were helpless and at the mercy of a stranger in a foreign land. Carlos and his associates searched us thoroughly, their hands ran through every pocket. It was an invasive violation of our privacy, but we didn't have the guts to say anything. As we stood there, they turned their attention to our rental car. It was ransacked, every nook and cranny inspected for any sign of threat or wrongdoing. Minutes stretched into what felt like hours as we endured the scrutiny of these men. It became painfully clear that they were looking for something, or someone, and we were caught in the crossfire. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, Carlos seemed satisfied that we posed no threat. He lowered his gun, and a hint of something resembling sympathy flashed in his eyes. "You can go," he said, stepping away from us. "But remember, this is not a place for outsiders. Stay away from here." With a final warning, Carlos and his gang fell back, disappearing into the shadows as quickly as they had appeared. My father and I were left standing by the side of the road, shaken and disoriented. We clambered back into our car, our hands trembling as we gripped the steering wheel. I glanced at my father. His face was a mask of exhaustion and relief. "We need to get out of here," he said quietly. I nodded in agreement, and we pulled away from that dangerous place, leaving the nightmare behind us. The streets of San Juan, with their vibrant colors and bustling life, seemed a world away. We made our way back to our family's house with our hearts still pounding with fear. When we finally arrived, we were greeted with a mix of relief and concern from our relatives. We told them about our scary experience, and they listened intently. They looked very concerned. It was clear that we had narrowly escaped a really bad situation. Every time I think about that day, I can't help but think about the many people who took a wrong turn down a place like that and never survived to tell their story.
I had always embraced the serenity of our tiny island, where the sun painted the sky with hues of gold and the sand felt like silk beneath my feet. But beneath the beauty lay a shadow, a reality that couldn't be ignored, a reality of high crime rates and the constant threat of danger. Living on a small Caribbean island had its charms, but it also came with its share of challenges. Crime was rampant, and power outages were like clockwork, a predictable disruption in our lives that criminals saw as an opportunity to strike. The terror that invaded the island during these outages provided a shield for those with malicious intent, and it was during one such night that my life would be forever changed. It was a warm evening. I had just finished dinner and was settling into my cozy little apartment, a refuge from the chaos of the world outside. I lit a few candles, and I chuckled to myself, thinking of the simplicity of life on our island. But as darkness fell, so did the power. The sudden silence that followed was jarring, the hum of electronics replaced by an eerie quiet. I sighed and reached for my phone, using its feeble light to navigate my way around. Power outages were a common occurrence that I had become used to. I settled onto the couch and tried to lose myself in a book. The energy in my place felt unsettling, like a predator lurking just beyond the edge of my vision. I shook off my unease and focused on my book, trying to lose myself in its pages. But then, a faint sound caught my attention, a shuffling noise, like footsteps on gravel. My heart skipped a beat, and I held my breath, straining to listen. The noise continued, growing louder, and I realized that someone was outside my window. Was it just a curious neighbor, or something far more sinister? I grabbed my phone, my fingers trembling as I dialed the local police. But the line was dead, a reminder of the power outage that had plunged us into darkness. I felt a wave of panic wash over me. I was alone, defenseless, with no way to call for help. I tiptoed to the window, my heart pounding in my chest, and cautiously peered outside. The darkness was impenetrable, and I strained my eyes, trying to make out any shapes in the blackness. And then, I saw it, a shadowy figure moving towards my door. I backed away from the window, my mind racing. I needed to think, to come up with a plan. My heart pounded in my ears as I considered my options. I could try to escape through the window, but I was on the second floor, and the fall would likely injure me. I needed to stay put, to find a way to defend myself. I grabbed a heavy candlestick from the coffee table, my hands trembling as I held it like a makeshift weapon. I ran to the far corner of the room. My heart was racing as I waited for the inevitable confrontation. And then, it happened, a loud crash, followed by the sound of splintering wood. The intruder had forced their way into my apartment. I held my breath and kept my tight grip on the candlestick as I prepared to defend myself. The intruder stepped into the room. I could barely see their silhouette in the darkness. My heart pounded, my adrenaline surging as I faced them, my voice shaking as I tried to summon the courage to speak. "Stay back," I warned, my voice quivering. But the intruder didn't listen. They walked towards me, and it was clear that they came to harm me. I was panicking, but I swung the candlestick with all my might, connecting with a sickening thud. The intruder let out a cry of pain and stumbled back once their balance was thrown off. I took advantage of the moment, my heart racing as I bolted towards the door. But before I could reach it, the intruder lunged at me, their fingers closing around my wrist in a vice-like grip. I screamed, my voice piercing the darkness as I fought to break free. Finally, with a burst of adrenaline-fueled strength, I managed to break free from their grasp. I stumbled towards the door, my heart pounding, and fumbled with the lock. The door swung open, and I sprinted into the hallway, the cool night air a welcome relief. I raced down the stairs, my breath coming in ragged gasps, until I reached the safety of the street below. I didn't stop running until I reached the nearest neighbor's house, pounding on the door until they answered. Tears streamed down my face as I recounted the terrifying ordeal, my voice shaking as I spoke. The neighbor called the police, and they arrived on the scene within minutes, which was very unusual. They apprehended the intruder, their presence a reassuring reminder that I was no longer alone in my fight. The investigation that followed revealed a chilling truth: the intruder had targeted me specifically, seeing the power outage as an opportunity to strike. It turned out that the intruder was a local bank worker at a bank I frequented. I had quite a bit of money in my bank account and made weekly withdrawals. The man would often joke during my withdrawals that my mattress must be filled with cash. I thought nothing of it until I found out he had planned to rob me the entire time. Little did he know, the weekly withdrawals were monies that I was taking out of the bank to pay to the care of my sick father who was in the hospital, and not money I was staking under my mattress. The bank worker, who was always friendly, is the last person I would expect to set me up or attempt to rob me in my home.
It was one of those sticky summer nights, the kind where the air felt heavy and suffocating. I had just finished binge-watching my favorite show when the power suddenly flickered and died. My apartment plunged into darkness, and I let out an exasperated sigh. Of course, it had to be now, when I was in the middle of a movie marathon. I grabbed my phone, using its faint glow to navigate my way around the living room. I debated lighting a few candles, but decided against it. I'd be fine, I thought. I knew my apartment like the back of my hand, and I'd been through enough power outages to handle this. I figured it was as good a time as any to take out the trash. I grabbed the bag and made my way to the hallway, my footsteps echoing eerily in the dark. The hallway was inky black, and I cursed myself for not grabbing a flashlight. I fumbled along the wall, inching my way to the garbage chute. Just as I was about to drop the bag down the chute, I heard a low creaking sound. My heart leaped into my throat, and I turned to see the building's front door slowly swinging shut. Panic surged through me. The last thing I needed was to be locked out in the pitch-black hallway. I sprinted towards the door, my fingers just grazing the handle as it clicked shut. "No, no, no," I whispered frantically, pounding on the door. My knuckles rapped against the cold metal, and I cursed my luck. I was trapped. I took a deep breath, trying to quell the rising anxiety. I wasn't a helpless damsel, I could handle this. I reached for my phone again, using its feeble light to guide my way back to the garbage chute. I disposed of the trash and turned to make my way back to my apartment. As I walked down the hallway, I heard footsteps behind me. My heart skipped a beat, and I spun around, the dim light of my phone casting eerie shadows. My eyes met those of a stranger, a man I had never seen in or around the building before. I held the door open for him, my polite nature taking over. He offered a nod of thanks, and I watched as he entered the building. I didn't think too deeply into it. He could have been a new tenant or a friend of someone else who lived here. I continued on my way, feeling a twinge of unease, but brushing it off. I was almost at my apartment door when I heard his voice behind me. "Hey, excuse me," he called out. I turned to face him, his silhouette barely visible in the darkened hallway. "Yeah." He seemed friendly enough, his voice polite. "I'm looking for an apartment on this floor. Do you know where 303 is?" I hesitated, my mind racing as I tried to recall if I had ever heard of an apartment 303 in the building. But something felt off, a prickling at the back of my neck that I couldn't ignore. I don't know the apartments by number, I replied cautiously. Sorry. He smiled, but it wasn't a friendly smile. It was predatory, unsettling. No problem, thanks anyway. I turned to unlock my apartment door, my heart pounding in my chest. As I stepped inside and closed the door behind me, a chill ran down my spine. What had just happened? Why did that encounter leave me feeling so uneasy? I paced around my apartment, my mind racing. Maybe I was just being paranoid. Maybe the guy was really just looking for an apartment. But deep down, I knew something wasn't right. I had a gut feeling that he was up to no good. I debated calling the building manager or the police, but I didn't have any concrete evidence to support my suspicions. I decided to stay vigilant, locking all my doors and windows and clutching my phone tightly. The minutes felt like hours as I sat in the darkness, every creak of the building making my heart skip a beat. And then I heard it, a faint scraping sound outside my apartment door. My breath caught in my throat, and I held my phone like a lifeline. I tiptoed towards the door, my heart pounding, and peered through the peephole. My blood ran cold. There he was, the stranger from the hallway, kneeling in front of my door. He was trying to pick the lock, a malicious grin on his face. Fear coursed through my veins, and I knew I had to act fast. I grabbed my phone and dialed 911, my voice trembling as I whispered my location and the situation. The dispatcher assured me that help was on the way, but I was on my own for the time being. I backed away from the door, my heart racing as I watched the stranger continue his attempts to break in. It felt like an eternity before I heard the distant wail of sirens approaching. The stranger must have heard them too, because he bolted, disappearing into the darkness. When the police arrived, I recounted the terrifying encounter, my hands still shaking from the adrenaline rush. They assured me that they would increase patrols in the area and advised me to stay vigilant. I thanked them, feeling a mixture of relief and lingering fear. In the days that followed, I couldn't shake off the paranoia that had settled in. Every noise, every shadow, sent a shiver down my spine. I installed extra locks on my doors and windows, and I made sure to always carry my phone with me, ready to dial for help at a moment's notice. That night, as I lay in bed with my heart still racing, I couldn't help but think about how close I had come to danger.
I never thought my journey into the world of online dating would lead to a nightmarish experience that would shake me to my core. This is the harrowing tale of a second date gone horribly wrong, an experience so chilling that it made me delete my dating app profile without a second thought. It all began with a promising first date. I had met Eric through a popular dating app, and after some pleasant conversations, we decided to meet in person. Our first date went splendidly. We had dinner at a cozy Italian restaurant, where we laughed, shared stories, and made plans for our next outing. I felt a genuine connection with him, and his easygoing charm put me at ease. Our first date ended with a promise to meet again soon. True to his word, Eric planned our second date. This time, he offered to pick me up from my home, a gesture that left me feeling appreciated and comfortable. As I eagerly prepared for the evening, I couldn't help but anticipate the exciting possibilities our budding connection held. When Eric arrived at my doorstep, he was just as charming as I remembered. He greeted me with a warm smile, and we set off for our night out. We decided to visit a quaint little jazz club, a place where live music filled the air, and the ambience was perfect for a romantic evening. The date started out wonderfully. We enjoyed the music, danced, and shared intimate conversations. I found myself drawn to Eric's charisma, the way he made me feel like the only person in the room. It was a night that left me eagerly anticipating our third date. But then, the evening took a bizarre and sinister turn. As we left the club and began the car ride back to my place, I noticed a drastic shift in Eric's demeanor. He grew increasingly agitated, and I couldn't help but feed off his nervous energy. As we drove down a dimly lit road, a police car came into view, its flashing lights reflecting off the rearview mirror. My heart began to race as I saw Eric's expression change from anxiety to sheer panic. The police cruiser pulled us over for a simple failure to signal, or so it seemed. The officer approached our car, and Eric's anxiety was palpable. The officer requested Eric's license and registration, which he promptly provided. However, when the officer inquired about whether Eric had been drinking, he admitted to having a single drink during dinner. That single admission was all it took for the officer to decide to conduct a field sobriety test. I sat in the passenger seat, frozen with anxiety, as I watched Eric go through the test. He stumbled and struggled to follow the instructions, his nervousness unmistakable. As the sobriety test unfolded, the officer requested to search the vehicle. Eric vehemently refused, but the officer decided to proceed with the search anyway. The car was meticulously inspected, and that's when they found it, a gun concealed beneath the driver's seat. I was in a state of shock, my mind unable to process the situation as it unfolded. As the tension in the car mounted, the officer instructed both Eric and me to step out of the vehicle. The situation was escalating rapidly, and I found myself paralyzed by fear. The officer wasn't done yet. He insisted on searching the trunk of the car, and I watched with a growing sense of dread. As the trunk was opened, the sight that met my eyes was beyond my worst nightmares. A lifeless body, wrapped in a tarp, lay in the trunk. The horror of the discovery was overwhelming, and I couldn't contain the nausea that surged within me. I rushed to the side of the road and vomited, my entire world spinning out of control. By the time I had recovered, the police had placed me in handcuffs, their stern faces leaving no room for questions. I was taken to the police station, where the interrogation began in earnest. They demanded answers, and I was in no position to refuse. Hours passed as they questioned me relentlessly, each question probing deeper into the events of that night. I recounted the evening to the best of my abilities, my voice shaky and my heart heavy with dread. It was a nightmarish experience that left me shaken to the core. The police eventually concluded that I had nothing to do with the macabre discovery in the trunk of Eric's car. They had gathered enough evidence to incriminate him, and he was taken into custody, facing charges that I couldn't even fathom. My life was forever changed by that dreadful night. I couldn't erase the haunting image of the lifeless body from my mind. The experience left me terrified, scarred, and profoundly affected. I deleted my dating app profile as soon as I could, vowing never to return to the world of online dating. It was a lesson that came at a high cost, a lesson in the dangers that could lurk behind a seemingly charming facade. The darkness that had unfolded that night was something I would never forget, a chilling reminder of the dangers that could be found in the most unexpected places.
I'm just a regular guy, no cape or superpowers, and my name doesn't matter. For the past few years, I've been working as a security guard at the very busy Crestwood Mall, a massive shopping center that draws folks from all over town. My job is straightforward: secure the mall, make sure everyone plays nice, and most importantly, keep the peace. But one Friday evening, all that changed, and I found myself fighting for my life in the food court. The mall was buzzing with life, just like any other Friday. Families, couples, and teenagers were all out and about, looking for deals and a good time. The food court was packed with hungry folks chowing down on everything from greasy burgers to sweet, sugary treats. I leaned against a pillar, taking in the scene with a contented sigh. That evening, though, something was different. A group of teenagers walked in, not your ordinary mall goer. They had that swagger and a mean look about them, and rumors had it they were part of some local gang. Trouble was written all over their faces. As the leader of the group, a tall, menacing kid with a red bandana wrapped around his arm sauntered into the food court. A chill ran down my spine. My instincts kicked in, and I knew I had to step in before things went south. I approached the gang, my security badge gleaming under the harsh mall lights. "Hey, folks, let's keep it peaceful here," I said, trying to sound firm but not confrontational. My hope was that words would diffuse the tension, but their eyes told a different story. The gang leader scoffed at me, his friends gathering around him like a pack of hyenas. "You ain't the boss of us, old man," he sneered, his voice dripping with disdain. The tension in the air was thick enough to cut with a knife, and I knew I had a tough situation on my hands. I took another step forward, trying to assert my authority without making things worse. But it was a lost cause. Tempers flared, and the food court turned into a battlefield. Tables crashed, chairs flew, and innocent folks scattered in terror. I had to do something. Desperation gripped me as I tried to restrain one of the teenagers, a wiry kid who was surprisingly strong. My arms strained, but I held on, determined to prevent further chaos. My duty was clear: protect the mall and its patrons, no matter what. But in the midst of the chaos, one of the gang members made a deadly move. He pulled out a gleaming knife from his pocket, and the metallic glint sent shockwaves through the crowd. Panic swept through the food court as people realized the danger we were all in. Time seemed too slow as I grappled with the teenager, my heart pounding in my chest. I did my best to keep him away from the knife-wielding gang member, but fate had a cruel twist in store for me. In a horrifying flash, the blade descended, piercing my thigh. Agony surged through me, and I staggered back, clutching the searing wound. Blood gushed from the deep puncture, staining the pristine tiles of the food court. I collapsed to the ground, pain overwhelming my senses. The world blurred, and I fought to stay conscious. Amid the chaos, someone managed to dial 911, and the distant wail of sirens grew steadily louder. Paramedics arrived, their uniforms a stark contrast to the mall's chaotic scene. They knelt beside me, their faces etched with concern. With skilled hands, they applied pressure to my wound, trying to stabilize me. The once bustling mall, a symbol of consumerism and commerce, had transformed into a crime scene. Panic and disbelief hung in the air as paramedics hurriedly prepared me for transport to Crestwood General Hospital. I had lost a dangerous amount of blood, and my life was hanging by a thread. As the ambulance raced through the city streets, my thoughts turned to my family, my wife, Sarah, and our 2 children. Their faces flashed before my eyes, and that gave me the strength to fight for survival. At the hospital, a team of doctors and nurses worked tirelessly to save my life. I woke up in a sterile hospital room with the harsh lights so bright they made me squint. Pain radiated from my leg, a constant reminder of the vicious attack in the food court. Tubes and wires seemed to be connected to every part of my body, and I felt vulnerable and disoriented. A nurse noticed my groggy awakening and rushed to my side. She had a warm smile that contrasted with the cold, sterile surroundings. "You're awake," she said with a gentle voice. "You're in the hospital. You've been through quite an ordeal." The memories of that fateful evening flooded back, and I winced as I recalled the knife piercing my leg. "The kids," I stammered. "Did anyone else get hurt?" The nurse's expression grew somber. "I'm afraid you were the only one seriously injured," she replied. "But the police are handling the situation, and your bravery helped prevent further harm." As I lay there, grateful to be alive, I couldn't help but reflect on how quickly life could take unexpected turns. My ordinary job as a mall security guard had thrust me into a life-threatening situation, but it had also shown me the strength of the human spirit and the resilience of those who stand up in the face of danger. In the days that followed, I began my long road to recovery, buoyed by the love and support of my family and friends. The scars on my leg would always serve as a reminder of that harrowing night in the food court, but they also reminded me of the unwavering courage that ordinary people can summon when faced with extraordinary circumstances. And as I looked out of the hospital window, I knew that when I returned to my post at Crestwood Mall, I would do so with even greater determination to keep the peace and protect the people who came to seek refuge in that bustling labyrinth of commerce and community.
Back in the 80s, while growing up in the rough streets of Baltimore, my brother Bobby and I would occasionally skip school. Skipping school was fun for us. The lure of adventure, the thrill of rebellion, it was all too irresistible. One morning, we decided to skip school, and after what we saw that day, we vowed to never do it again. We found ourselves standing in front of the towering, long-abandoned factory, a place that had always piqued our curiosity but had remained off limits. I looked at Bobby and I could tell he was nervous, so I asked him if he was sure about us entering the building. We had heard all sorts of stories about this place, from it being haunted to a secret drug den. He said he was sure, and even though I was also nervous, my curiosity weighed more in that moment. I nodded in agreement as my heart raced. I told him, "Yeah, man. It's now or never. Let's see what's inside." We stepped up to the door cautiously. We pushed open the rusted, squealing door and stepped into the dim abandoned building. The air was musty, and the only sounds were the echoes of our footsteps and the occasional drip of water from the leaky ceiling. The place was a maze of abandoned machinery, forgotten relics from a time when this factory had been filled with life. The walls were covered in a mix of cobwebs and graffiti. We stepped deeper into the factory. We didn't have any flashlights, so we depended on the glow coming from the cracked door and the large window close by. Broken windows allowed slivers of dusty sunlight to penetrate, casting eerie shadows on the cracked concrete floor. As we explored further, we began to hear hushed voices, distant murmurs that sent shivers down our spines. We exchanged nervous glances, our curiosity now tainted with anxiety. Following the voices, we stumbled upon a hidden corner where two men were engaged in a heated conversation. It was obvious that we were watching a drug deal take place. A police officer, in uniform, was arguing with another man. In that moment, I was very nervous at the thought of what could happen if the men saw us listening in. The tension between the officer and the man escalated rapidly until it reached a point of no return. In the blink of an eye, the officer drew his weapon and fired. The gunshot echoed through the factory, and Bobby gasped in shock. I was paralyzed and my heart was pounding in my chest as I watched the man crumple to the ground, clutching his leg in pain. But our hiding spot wasn't as discreet as we thought. In my startled state, I moved too quickly and accidentally kicked a beer can, sending it clattering across the floor. The police officer's head snapped in our direction. He began squinting in the darkness. He was trying to figure out what had caused the beer can to move across the room. We held our breath, praying that the shadows would conceal us. He cautiously approached the area where we were hiding. By this time, he still had his gun pointed at the other man who lied bleeding on the floor. The seconds felt like hours as he checked the surroundings. Just as I thought we were done for, the officer shook his head. He muttered something under his breath and then turned back to the wounded man. With one last, chilling look in our direction, he left the injured man on the floor and exited the factory, leaving us trembling in the darkness. As soon as the officer was out of sight, we waited for a few minutes to ensure he was gone. Then, we cautiously approached the injured man, who was groaning in pain. We realized we couldn't just leave him there. Together, we managed to drag the injured man out of the factory and into a nearby alley. He was bleeding badly, and we were scared for his life. We decided to call 911 anonymously at a payphone, making sure to report the injured man's location without revealing our identities. It felt like hours, but eventually, an ambulance arrived to take the wounded man to the hospital. We watched from the shadows. Our hearts were heavy with the weight of what we had witnessed. After ensuring that the scene was clear, we made our way back home. The events of the day had left us shaken and unsure of what to do next. We couldn't just forget what we had seen. When we returned home, our mother noticed our anxious expressions and immediately pressed us for an explanation. We hesitated but eventually shared the terrifying ordeal we had witnessed in the abandoned factory. Our mother's face grew pale as we recounted the events. She listened intently. Her eyes were filled with a mixture of concern and fear. When we had finished, she took a deep breath and spoke. "Terry, Bobby, you did the right thing by calling for help, but I need you to promise me something," she said, her voice trembling. "You must never tell anyone else what you saw today. Not your friends, not your teachers, no one." We exchanged puzzled glances, unsure of why she would ask this of us. "Why, Mom?" Bobby asked. Our mother hesitated, her eyes darting nervously. "Because sometimes, people will do anything to protect their secrets, even if it means hurting others," she explained. "You don't know who that police officer is connected to, and you don't know what he's capable of." Bobby and I exchanged a solemn look, understanding the gravity of the situation. We nodded in agreement, promising to keep our silence. Weeks turned into months, and we kept our secret. Life went on, but the memory of that fateful day continued to haunt us. We wondered about the injured man and what had become of him. As time passed, we noticed changes in our neighborhood. There were whispers of increased drug activity and corruption within the police force. Our city was changing, and not for the better. One evening, as we watched the news, a story broke about a series of investigations into police misconduct and drug-related corruption in Baltimore. Our hearts raced as we recognized the face of the police officer from that dreadful day. The truth was coming to light, and it sent shockwaves through the city. But we dared not speak a word of what we knew. Our mother's warning echoed in our minds, a constant reminder of the danger that lurked in revealing our secret. As the investigations deepened, more corrupt officers were exposed, and the city's trust in law enforcement crumbled. We watched from the sidelines, our secret growing heavier with each passing day. One evening, there was a knock on our door, and my heart leaped into my throat. I opened the door to find two detectives standing there. They looked really intimidating. They explained that they were investigating the corruption within the police force and were seeking information from anyone who might have witnessed or experienced misconduct. They asked us if we had seen anything suspicious. We told them that we hadn't seen anything, but told them that we wouldn't hesitate to contact them if we saw something. In the neighborhood we lived in, nobody spoke to the police, and we learned that at a young age. Fast forward several years later, the same corrupt police officer that we saw the day in the factory ended up being a leader in the community. We watched him organize many toy drives for kids during the holidays, food drives for single mothers who couldn't afford groceries, and most shocking of all, we witnessed him raise thousands of dollars for kids whose parents are drug addicts. Everyone in the community loved and respected this man, and no matter how hard we tried, Bobby and I couldn't share those feelings. Thank you for listening. Stay spooked.